right. So, thank you for coming. You're clearly the geek portion of the fandom. My name is Brony. I am, among other things, the president and chairman of the board of the Brony Thank You Fund. And in my copious spare time, I also organize the annual herd census, which has just completed this year. So today we're going to be talking about the first results out of the herd census. It closed last Friday. It was extremely successful, and there were some really interesting results to share this year. So my to-do list for today, being a Twilight fan, I had to make a list. We're going to look at some basic herd demographics. We're going to talk some about the fandom and its attitudes. We're going to talk about the important stuff. See, I was smart. I know I had to put favorite pony later in the presentation so people would stay around. If you give favorite pony first, everyone just leaves afterward. And there's actually a really interesting result. I'm going to give you guys some audience participation in a little bit. So start thinking about who the main six actually are. And finally, we're going to talk about something really interesting we did for the first time this year, which is herd personality. And then we're going to finish up talking a little bit about future plans for the upcoming census next year and some other work we're going to be doing in the summer. So just to start off a little bit, I promise, by the way, I am a good PowerPoint presentator. This is one of only 3 bullet-pointed slides in the entire presentation. I am not going to be reading slides for the entire presentation. Last year, we only had the census of 2 weeks. We got just over 9,000 completed surveys. There were only 10 questions in the survey. They were all multiple choice questions, and we ground the numbers using Excel. This year, we kept it open for a month. We got over close to 22,000 completed. 24,000 people started the census. About just under 22,000 people completed the census. We had 42 questions this year. We had a variety of formats. We used some multiple choice. We had some fill-in portions, and we used something called a Likert scale, which is like a 0 to 9 type scale. And this year, because my wife is a doctoral student, I can get cheap educational software. So we're grinding the numbers with SPSS, which is a very high-end statistical package that's used in research. And just to give you an idea what that means, Excel basically you can do like a crosstab, wow. SPSS, you can get all sorts of interesting things like chi-square and Pearson's regressions, and all sorts of things that help you to validate the statistical power of the numbers you're getting. So not so much for the data I'm presenting today, but for stuff I'm going to be presenting later in the summer, you're going to start to see a lot more talk about whether things are statistically significant or not. And that's stuff that we can give because we've got this higher package. Come, sit down, learn of the herd. All right, so by the way, one of the things I'm so pleased is we got so many responses this year, because we got 9,002 responses last year, and all I heard all summer was, oh, it's over 9,000! Thank you, Dragon Ball Z. All right, so let's start with the herd demographics. We're still depressingly male. These numbers are essentially unchanged from last year, about 85% male, 15% female, and a very small percentage I don't want to answer the question, which had to do with some transgender people who feel uncomfortable asking that question. We're going to rephrase the question a little bit next year to make it a little bit more transgender friendly. So, you know, it's just the nature of the fandom is it isn't moving significantly at all from the numbers we got last year. What's kind of cool, last year we couldn't give an age distribution because we asked for numbers bin, so it's like 10 to 14, 14 to 16, and so you couldn't get this kind of nice curve where you can actually see the distribution. I'm going to give you 2 minutes of introductory stats for those. You know this stuff, but some people may not know. So there's 3 different ways to do an average: the mode, the median, and the mean. The mean is literally an arithmetic mean. It's the average. The median is the number which 50% fall below and 50% fall above, and it's not equal to the mean usually. And then the mode is just the most common answer that you got. Come on in and learn about the herd. So the mean age of the herd is just over 20 years old. The median is 19, so that Actually, it's a fairly even distribution. And the most common ones you get is that someone's 18 years old. Now, one other thing you need to know about is standard deviations. Standard deviation is a measure of how wide the distribution is. So the general rule of thumb is if you go one standard deviation to the left and the right of the mean, you get 66% of the group, and if you go two standard deviations out, it's about 88%, and then it's like 96% at three standard deviations. I'm here. Let's all count together, folks. 1, 2, 3, 4. I am more than 5 standard deviations off the mean of the herd. To put this in perspective, if this was a height chart, I would be 7 feet tall. There are very few people in the fandom over the age of 30. Interestingly, by the way, just as an aside, I was flying in last night. I sat next to a Brony I had never met before. Come on in. It turns out he is also 50 years old. He was born on my exact birthday. So what's the statistical likelihood of that? Two people who had never met before, both Bronys, both from New England, sit on a plane, and they were born on the same day in history. If you look at female distribution, something interesting comes out. The mean isn't significantly different. Female fans are just a little bit younger than male Bronies, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. The standard deviation is pretty much the same. It's about the same curve. But if you look at the previous slide, it really comes down very steeply. I can do this cool thing. Over here, it tends to be a much sharper decline on the male side. You have this little bump here on the female side. And what I'm kind of hypothesizing is that that's the actual primary demographic of the show, the 6 to 12-year-old female fans of the show, aging up into the fandom. Because the fandom's been around for about 3 years now. The show's been around for about 3 years. So what you've got is those people are starting to get into high school, starting to encounter other Bronies, and so now you've got this lump of people on the bottom side who are moving into the fandom. And you can see this very clearly if you overlay male versus female on the distribution, because you can see how the male, the blue, goes down very quickly. But the pink kind of has a much more normal distribution on both sides of the curve. So it looks like there's a population aging up into the fandom on the female side. So this is another incredibly depressing chart if you have a male in the fandom. About 12% of females are married. Only about 4%, under 4% of males are married in the fandom. By the way, over 18 only, because there aren't a lot of 14-year-old married fans on your side. But there is a bright side. Males are only half as likely to move to a divorce. So, and obviously there's not a lot of widowed fans because they're just not old enough. It's a little brighter if you ask, have you been in a relationship, a serious relationship in the last 12 months? If you ask that, about 45% of female fans have been, and just under 30% of male fans have been. So there is romance in the fandom. We are also a depressingly white fandom. Just under 90% of fans, this was a multiple choice, so you could pick more than one. Just under 90% of fans are white. Very low, actually there's many more Asian fans than African or Black fans. We didn't ask Hispanic. I'm probably gonna broaden this out a little bit next year because we've got an awful lot of people who responded other. Although some people who responded other responded green. So, there's a perception that a lot of people in the fandom serve in the military. It's actually just about the average of about 5%. And that includes people who are in places like Germany where you get compulsory service. So it's not less, but it's also not more than kind of the national average when you look at it. This is a heat map of Bronies by country. So the way you read this, the thing you have to realize is that this is not a linear heat map because there's so many countries that have very few. So if you look at the thing at the bottom, All of the colors up to yellow are clustered in and up to about 200 people, and then it broadens out. So all those countries that we're showing, purple and blue, and even the reds are under like 500 people. And then you very quickly balloon up, and Canada and the UK and the US have large Brony populations, obviously. The US is a huge one. Just had a little bit more clearly if you break down the top 10, where you can see how dramatically it drops off from the US to anywhere else. Interestingly, Mexico and Chile moved into the list this year, and I think that's because there are now Spanish language versions broadcasting in those areas. So, especially Mexico really shot up. It wasn't even on the charts last year, and now it's suddenly moved up into like 5th place. US Bronies by state is a population map. You know, you get Bronies where you have people. So you see a fair amount in New York. You see, obviously, California, which is the big population center, has a lot of people. Texas, which is the population center, has a lot of people. But we can make this a fairer chart by looking at a per capita chart. And then all of a sudden, it's a very different story. California is kind of right in the middle. I'm proud to say New Hampshire, where I come from, is a very large per capita Brony population. But as last year, the big winner is Washington State. I don't know if that's because they're close to DHX or what, but Washington State, and then for some reason, Idaho and Colorado and those places, I think because they just have very low population, so any Bronies count. But even relative to large population areas, it's really the Northwest and the Northeast are the hot spots of the Brony population. And once again, as last year, what is wrong, Mississippi? Why have you no Bronies? They are like way in the Yeah, that's right. We need Bronies with goods. Number of people in the household is not a really surprising number. It's just about 4. The mean is 3.5, but the median is 4. So typical Brony household has 4 people. It's kind of your standard nuclear family. Somebody responded 6,000 to this question. I'm not quite sure if they either live in a really huge boarding school or just were coming up with an interesting answer. This is another kind of number that's more respective of the fact that the family is very young. 74% of Bronies are still living at home. But when you break it down by age, you get a kind of better picture. This is what I call the there is hope chart. People, Bronies do move out of their parents' houses. They're not all living in the basement eating Cheetos and playing World of Warcraft. The bad news is it appears that if you are 30 years old and living in your parents' house, you are always going to be living in your parents' house. But you can see it does drop off very rapidly in the 20s till you get down to about, again, about a third of Bronies are still living at home at 30. But also, when you get into that, you notice there's kind of a dip coming up at 40. I'm wondering if that, this question is, are you still living with your parents? A lot of people, I think parents might be moving back into the house when you get into the older population. And also, given the economy now, there's a lot more people who are just living with their parents later in life. Number of living siblings. This kind of gives the lie to the Bronies are only child thing. Typical Brony has 1 sibling. You're more likely to have 2 siblings than no siblings at all. So most Bronies are not only children. Most Bronies still have their parents, both parents living. So the picture we're kind of getting, especially when I show you the next slide, is of a very stable household population for most Bronies. Because this is really interesting. If you ask, did you before the age of 18 have a divorce in your family? Only 31% of Bronies respond yes. Now, if you look at the national average for in the first 15 years of marriage, do people do families experience divorce? 43% do it. I'm reminding you that this is the first 18 years of a Brony's life. So you have to take that 15 years of marriage and then add 3 more years and then add however long it was before the parents first had children. So that would be a higher divorce rate than 43%. So the picture we're getting here is of people who live in stable nuclear families that have not experienced divorce. And one of the theories that I'm starting to develop is that one of the reasons that people feel comfortable being bronies is that they are in stable households. When you're in a divorced household or a single family household, you tend to take a much more mature role. You have to become a surrogate parent. You don't want to rock the boat. You may have some feelings of guilt if there's a divorce. So you're much less likely to want to be kind of this wild out there type of person because you're trying to be in a more responsible role. Not saying that bronies are irresponsible, but just that you wouldn't want to be adding more baggage into the family. This is the most useless question you can ask the brony, is how much do you make? Because 32% of them don't know. And then another 13% didn't want to tell us. Clearly, you know, there weren't a lot of bronies going, Dad, how much do we make so I can fill out this online survey? But we can play with these numbers a little bit. So if you go look at the US Census data, we've got good data for 25 to 34, which is an age where people ought to start to know what their household income is. And then what you have to do is you have to take, there's two ways you can play with the numbers. So again, these would be the numbers, right? We say 0 to 25, 25 to 50. So if you take the low ball, which is we say, anybody who said 0 to 25 made nothing. Anybody who said 25 to 50 made 25. You take all the people who didn't respond and you say they didn't make anything. And then you just average it. You get a low ball estimate of $30,000 a year household income. If you take a more honest approach and say, we'll take the mid-range of all that, so someone who says 0 to 25 made 1250, you take all the people who didn't respond for one reason, and you just say they had the same distribution as the people who did, then you get a number around 51,000, which is actually a little bit more than the US average for that number. So they're fairly worthless numbers, but you can still play around with them a little bit. I think household income is just one of those numbers that I'm sure Hasbro would love to know, but this is hard to get their numbers for. Most bronies are attending school, 64% are still in school of some kind. Another 6% are doing some kind of part-time schooling. Most bronies are somewhere in the attending high school to attending college undergrad level. There are a significant number of bronies who have graduate degrees. Most bronies have bachelors who have gotten some kind of a secondary degree. But when you ask what are their plans, you say, what do you, not just what is your dream, but what do you seriously think that you could reach for a highest level of schooling? Almost all of them say that they don't want a bachelor's or a graduate student. Now, how that's going to pan out, who knows, but there certainly seems to be a desire on the part of the brony community to get some significant degree of higher education. Here's another really depressing chart. So if you take people who are over the age of 22 and not in school, and you say, what is your working status? 61% say that they're working full-time. If you combine the not working and not collecting unemployment, and collecting unemployment, you get 18%. So 18% of the under 22 not in school bronies are unemployed, which is a horrendous unemployment rate. Yeah, it's really awful. And then we've got another 15% who are working 30 hours a week or less. Here's our good titillating chart, brony sexuality. And I've got a really fun chart right after this. So only about 1.2% indicate they're lesbian, another 1.9% say they're gay. Those are kind of right in line with the national numbers. There's not this huge brony queer population. Another 15% say they're bisexual. I think that's probably, again, an indication of the youth of the fandom, that's kind of that age when you experiment a little bit. The fun number is 1.6% are transgender. That's about 3 times the national average. But my question is that bronies or is that being kind of an elite fandom? Because I know in my science fiction fandom, we tend to have a significant transgender community, so that'll be an interesting follow-up. Another 3% are polyamorous, and then just about 67% are exclusively heterosexual. And again, it's because of the youth of the fandom. about 10% say they're asexual, which means they have not developed a gender identity yet. Here's my fun chart, and this is kind of like we need a very special bilingual pony to teach gender roles or sexuality roles. Because if you start cross-tabbing, are you heterosexual against lesbian, gay, and bisexual? We have 23 people who said they are both exclusively heterosexual and lesbians. And then we have 15 who say they're gay and heterosexual, and 189 who are bisexual and exclusively heterosexual. So, like, as I said, fuck ponies, you know. So now let's get into the real fun stuff, fandom. So when did fans first come into the Brony fandom? About a quarter of them during season 1, about a quarter of them, a little more than a quarter of them between 1 and 2, so about half the fandom came in before season 2. Another third roughly came in during season 2, and only a very small amount, only 17% have come in before or during the last season. How many of them watched previous generations? This is a multiple choice, so it doesn't add up. But you had about a little under 10% watched G1, you had about 5% watched MLP Tales, and God help them, about 4% watched G3, and somehow managed to survive the experience. And then about 17% watched some older show but didn't know what. How did they learn about ponies? Most of them learned about it from a friend, about a third from a friend, about a third from message boards, and then there's this huge other group because evidently 4chan is considered a message board by a lot of people. So you see a lot of 4chan in there. And then very small numbers of things like seeing it on TV or media coverage or family members. My son actually did learn about it from me, so I'm in that group. He's in that group. Only about a quarter have attended any kind of a meetup or going to get together. Now these are lighter charts, so the way you read these is you take, these are things where you ask like very uncomfortable, somewhat comfortable, very comfortable, and there's a middle one where you say neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. You drop all those out because they're not interesting. And then you chart all that very and somewhat uncomfortable on one side, and all these somewhat comfortable or very comfortable on the other. So the more it leans one way or another indicates the trend. So how comfortable are you doing things that identify you as a Brony around the house? People are pretty comfortable about that. Less so, but still pretty comfortable in front of relatives and parents. About the same comfort level at school. Actually more comfortable doing it in public. And then pretty uncomfortable doing it in a romantic situation. So, you know, people say, "Hon, what I'd really like you to do is hold my plush." Not really. Same kind of idea, this is agree to disagree. Most fan Bronies, not surprisingly, agree pretty strongly that they are Bronies. Only about half think that any fan of Friendship and Magic is a Brony. Very strong agreement for Bronies can be either male or female. Pretty strong disagreement, and I'll show a follow-up on this, that females should be called Pegasus sisters. Very dramatically negative disagreement that people who call themselves Bronies are embarrassing. And pretty strong disagreement that Bronies are too active on the internet. But Bronies mildly agree that they try too hard to convince other people to watch the show. So take it down a little. So if you ask male versus female about the Pegasus dispute, males pretty strongly disagree about it. And again, all those people in the middle, males basically don't give a fuck. They're willing to leave it to the females, so that's why that's a much smaller chunk. Most of them are right in the middle. When you ask females about it, they are really negative about it. Only 15% of females want to be called a Pegasus. So maybe it's time to kill that one off. Who have they tried to convince to watch the show? The majority have tried to watch friends do it, over 70%. Not a lot of people have tried to have their spouse watch it. Obviously not a lot of people have grandchildren, so not very many people do that. Schoolmates, parents, actually parents is a fairly strong response, about 20%. So you can just see, co-workers, they're all about 20%. The big ones are siblings, brothers and sisters, and friends, and schoolmates. This is another fun one. What do weekly, so more than once a week. And the blue is once or twice, the red is 3 or 5, and the green is pretty much every day. So a lot of people listen to Brony music, a lot of people watch episodes, especially during the season. A lot of people listen to music from the show. Smaller amount read fanfic. A lot of people watch PMVs. And then obviously less people create stuff than watch it. But there's a fairly strong group of people, about a quarter of the fandom, create some kind of artwork. All right, here's another kind of hot button issue for fandom. How many Bronies consider themselves to be a furry? It was 17%. So it's not, there is some furriness in the fandom, but it's not in any way an overwhelming percentage. Small minority. How many have ever cosplayed? 74% have never cosplayed. And interestingly, there's no correlation between cosplay and furriness. All right, so now the real fun stuff. Who is favorite Brony? But we'll start with why do you watch the show? And this is really interesting and twigs into some personality stuff. Overwhelmingly, the reason that people watch the show is for the characters. The animation style comes next down there, and then you get into the plot, and no, we're not talking about flames. So the key point is people really like the characters. Here we go, folks. Favorite character. Now, this was you could only pick one question. Favorite character, second year in a row, overwhelmingly, Twilight Sparkle. But when you ask, who are the main 6, right? The main 6 are Twilight Sparkle, Fluttershy, Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie, Luna, and Rarity. Applejack, you're just bucked. Yeah, Luna is actually much more popular than Rarity. Now this is an eye chart. The red line is how much you would like to see that person in the show, and the blue line is how much you think you're like them. So if you look at that, Twilight is very strongly identified with by the fandom as being someone who's like them, they identify with. And Fluttershy is the next highest one. And when you see the personality results, you understand why. But if you look at the red line, who would I like to see in the show? Right, remember, Twilight was the most popular when you just say, who's your favorite? But when you give them a 1 to 10 rating, you say, how much would you like to see this person in the show? Luna just beats out Twilight. She is the pony that people most enjoy seeing in the show by like a 10th of a percentage point. All right, so now we're ready for personality. This year we asked Bronies to do a Jungian personality disorders, which is very similar to the Myers-Briggs. 18,000 of them responded out of 22,000. It was a 72-question survey, so I'm very happy. This is incredibly weird. First of all, if you go look, this is all introvert versus extrovert. All the E's are extroverts. That's the extrovert population in the family, right? It's about 20%. Fandom is 80% introvert. But what's really interesting is this part right down, right down here. This one group, INTJ, introverted, intuitive, thinking, judging people, 27%. In the general population, that represents 1 to 4% of the population. So there's this huge chunk of those 4 of them, INTP, INTJ, and INFP, are something like 10% of the normal population, and it's like 40% of the Brony population. So let's talk about that one specific personality type. The key point is, when we talk about introversion, people say, oh, that means they're shy, they don't want to meet people, they hide at home. That's not what introversion means. It means that when they're in a party, for example, they are expending energy to be in that party. They're making an effort to be social. An extrovert would be taking in energy, would energize them to be in a party. Introverts tend to be more contemplative, tend to be more solitary activities. Extroverts tend to want to be in more group thriving activities. So intuitive is more abstract and concrete, so they're more big picture people. Thinking versus feeling means that they like objective criteria, they like facts as opposed to opinions. And then J versus P, receiving, they like to plan early. So if they went on vacation, they would have their whole agenda planned out rather than kind of say, well, we'll just see what happens when we get there. Here's, so INTJ, which again is 27% of the fandom, is one of the rarest of the types. Some verbs for that is analytical, they like working alone, they're less sociable, they're pragmatic, logical, creative, you're literate, you can read this. But importantly, especially when you think about things like 4chan, they don't like authority, especially just imposed authority. So here's if you just look at the cuts of the four properties, nearly 80% introverted in the fandom. It's, in the general population, it's pretty much a 50-50 split. Not so strong sensing versus intuitive, but still intuitive is quite a bit of it. Again, even less so for thinking versus feeling, much closer to being the split. And judging versus perceiving goes backwards, about 2/3 judging. But here's like an interesting cut. So if you go back to that, how much do you identify with the characters? And you split it introvert versus extrovert. You can see why Pinkie Pie at the end, extroverts really identify with her. Introverts, not much at all. Conversely, fans tend to just identify with Twilight in general, even if they're extroverts. So you can see Twilight's, but again, there's a difference. But if you go look at Fluttershy again, introverts really identify with her, extroverts not so much. And Rainbow Dash again flips the other way, where extroverts tend to identify with her a lot more than introverts. But when you go ask them, do you enjoy seeing the character in the show, it doesn't seem to matter, right? It's pretty much even across. Pinkie Pie tends to be a little more enjoyed by extroverts, but it's pretty much even across the board. So it seems even if you identify with the characters, that doesn't affect how much you enjoy seeing in the show, but it may affect how much you enjoy the show in general. All right, so looking forward, next year's census, we're going to launch on 2014. The goal is to do it in more languages. One of the reasons we couldn't do more languages this year is we're using a third-party personality test and can be translated. Next year, we're probably going to use something called the Big Five, which is a different kind of personality test, so we can translate it. We're going to have a better instrument. We're going to try to be a little bit more sensitive on some of our wordy questions, so as not to offend any of the more sensitive communities, especially around gender. Here's the big announcement we're making here. I've been meeting with a couple of PhDs at Salem State University. The numbers we're getting now, you can't directly use for research because they're not IRB approved. They don't have they have people who are under 18 without parental consent. So next year, we are going to, not next year, next year we're going to do it the same way we did this year, because we like getting that full picture of the Brony spectrum. But this summer, we're going to do a follow-on study that will be reviewed by the Salem State IRB. It'll be restricted to 18 and over. We're going to look more at personality, and our goal is to produce one or more, hopefully two or more, peer-reviewed, published journal articles out of this. And also my wife is going to come on board on this because she's getting her doctorate in psychology and has 4 years of statistics. So she doesn't want to write any of it, but she'd like to be involved, and we consider her a really good resource. So look for that. There has been some published Brony research now, but I know that the Brony study folks have a couple on the way, and we're going to have a couple on the way, probably looking more at gender issues and more from a media perspective. And with that, this is just the first data dump. We haven't done any real cross-tabbing or correlation. We're going to have more in-depth analysis to come later in the year. It'll all be published on Census.com. The easiest way to find out when there's new research coming out from us is going to be to follow me on Twitter at @SciCoderBrony. I expect to see everybody following me. I'm going to come and hunt me down. If you want to help next year, you can go to heardcensus.lafora.com. This year I didn't reach out as much as I wanted to because we had some rushed issues getting this out. But next year I would like to get people involved to do artwork for the published reports, doing translation, doing fan outreach, especially to other countries. So if you want to give us a hand, please go to the forum. And with that, if there are any questions, I was going to do some real-time analysis on that. I didn't have a So I read it if anybody has